So it's another night in the garage and another 5th gen Toyota 4Runner. This 4Runner is going to get the Old Man Emu coil springs all the way around with the Bilstein 5100 shocks and the Old Man Emu upper control arms. So I just went around, did a quick pre-measurement of the suspension points all the way around. So you're like 34 and 3/8 on this side, 34 and 5/8 on the front on the other side, and in the rear, this side was 36 and 1/8. The other side was 36 and 1/2. So again, I do have a drain in the floor here, so it's a little bit sloped floor. Could throw you off a tiny bit, but the Toyotas are notorious for leaning into the driver's side anyway. So yeah, well, we're gonna get started. It's always nice to work on a fresh, clean rig, and things always go a whole lot easier when they're new. So when you're doing the upper control arms, don't forget to take out your anti-lock brake line bolt here. Make sure that you got good slack in that, and then we'll tie the upper arm, or the spindle, to the strut to prevent it from coming out while you're doing that. Also, you need to just very gently bring back this lip so that you can slide that bolt out. They obviously set the body on the frame after the chassis is all assembled, and they don't leave adequate space to remove that upper control arm bolt. So sure you can kind of see, but you get about that far and then the bolt is hitting this flange. So you'll keep your washer here, pull this flange towards you just slightly, and you should be able to slide the bolt out on this driver's side. Then I'll go about this the way I normally do. We're gonna take the skid plate off because it is getting a differential drop, so we're gonna need access to those bolts. And then we'll have access to loosen the lower control arm bolts. Again, it's getting alignment when you're done, so there's no reason to not. Go ahead and loosen those up. Take the 2 bolts out that are going vertically out here into the bottom of the knuckle or spindle assembly, and swing that lower control arm right down out of your way. That way you don't have to mess around with sway bar links, brake hoses, any of that other stuff. You can leave everything connected and just drop that strut assembly right out of the bottom. It's the easiest way I've found to do it. I've been doing it this way for years. Tons of Toyotas, never had a problem. So I'm sure this one will be just the same, or at least I sure hope so. On the driver's side, we are hitting this wire brace. So there's a 10mm bolt. You can see it. There's a bolt right at the end of that brace underneath this battery. 10mm head, so we're going to loosen that so we can swing that wire out of the way, and then we should be able to pull this bolt out. So not too big a deal. And boom, no upper arm. So I ended up using a zip tie from the sway bar link to the coil to keep the spindle from coming out. As long as you're not putting any pressure on it, it seems to be working just fine. No big deal. So we'll match this up to the new upper arm and start putting it in place. This is a new Old Man Emu arm next to your original arm. And, all in all, I guess it's tubular in design. You can see the ball joint's probably sitting at a slightly different angle, pitched more outward for the raised height. I do find it interesting. It comes with a greasable upper ball joint. And Old Man Emu provides you with this cap. They want you to unscrew the greaser, set it inside here in this slot, and then thread this cap over top of the ball joint, which is kind of interesting. Effectively making it non-serviceable unless you know it's there, which is kind of odd. You think you would just leave an open greaser where anybody could maintain that as they're doing the chassis services on it, but that's just me, I guess. Different ideas. Anyway, let's get this new arm put into place. And just like that, we got the new upper arm in. So we've gone ahead and torqued this and put the cotter pin in. We got the anti-lock brake line on. However, if you've ever watched any of my videos, I always leave the control arm bolts loose they're finger tight. But I wait until the vehicle is on the weight of itself before I tighten bolts that have bushings in them like that. You want all of those suspension bolts tightened when the bushing is at its ride height, so it doesn't have any preload against the rubber bushing ahead of time. If we were to tighten the suspension right now, there would be preload on those bushings, and then as the suspension went up, it would torque that bushing, therefore causing it to wear prematurely. So I always wait until all the weight is on the floor of the, sitting on its tires, all the weight on it before I tighten control arm bolts, track bar bolts, link arm bolts, any of that stuff. So this vehicle is no different than any other one. We're going to wait until everything is on its weight, and we'll tighten all of those bushing hardware. So now that we got that done, we're going to go ahead and take the lower bolts out of the control arm. We'll loosen those control arm bolts and swing that arm out of the way, drop the strut, and pretty straightforward procedure. Also important to note when you're doing these, Toyota utilizes kind of a bolt through the center and then a tightener for your caster camber adjusters. So this hex piece here and this one at this end can actually adjust caster camber. This nut is your clamp or your pinch bolt, 22 millimeter. So really all I'm trying to do is loosen this, and then the bolt in the front, which is in there, and we're going to drop the skid plate anyway. I need to do that, but we'll loosen that. Don't put your wrench on this or that or the back ones. Those are what actually adjusts your caster camber, and we're not trying to do that right now. We're trying to loosen the arm, swing it down. If you bump it, it's not a big deal as long as you're not going to drive it for an extended duration. This truck's going to go straight to the alignment shop, just like they should, right after you do some major suspension work like this. So those guys are going to be the ones messing with that adjustment and getting that dialed in to make it drive down the road straight. But just want to forewarn you, if you go torquing on these, you'll bend these tabs, which are what kind of hold or capture your caster camber bolt. So you do not want to be forcing a wrench or whatever on those and bending these little tabs, or you'll have bigger problems. So anyway, yeah, let's get the skid plate off. We'll loosen that front bolt, and then we'll get to dropping this strut. And just like that, with the bolts loose, that lower control arm will swing right down, and the strut comes straight out of the bottom. You can literally just put it right up through here without messing with brake lines, anti-lock brake lines, tie rods, sway bars, any of that stuff. So this is definitely the preferred method. Much, much easier. So now that we've got a couple of stock components here, let's go grab the aftermarket strut. Okay, passenger side, kind of same as the driver's side. The only difference being that there's an air conditioning line running along the inside of the frame rail right here. The small diameter line down there, which is kind of hard to see. But we had to pop that loose from its clip on the side of the inner fender here. I was able to do it by hand, gently pried it over. We were able to get the bolt slid back and forth, and now I will snap that back into its bracket. But yeah, pretty straightforward. Did not have to tweak the pinch weld on this side, just the AC line. So we'll put that back in place, and then we'll continue on with swapping the strut. All right, so we got the passenger side bolted together. So things you can do before setting it on the ground: you can tighten up this upper ball joint nut, make sure your anti-lock brake line is back on and tight. You can tighten the top upper strut mount bolts, but bushing stuff, that's finger tight still, as is the lower strut bolt, and the lower control arm bolts are still loose. So we did retighten the two bolts going in the bottom ball joint to the spindle there. Those are all good and tight. So we'll wait. Right now, we're going to move on. We're going to get the front differential drop installed, and then we're going to lower the front of the vehicle down onto its weight, and then we'll tighten up that remaining hardware. So as far as the differential drop goes, I've installed a bunch of these from different places. They all seem to be the exact same thing. Machine billet spacer that drops the front of the differential, and then some little machine billet spacers to lower the skid plate down the little bit so that it's not vibrating against it. Save your money. I haven't seen a hardware difference in one of the $20 eBay ones versus an $80 brand name one. They all seem to do the same thing, function the same way. So we're going to get this installed. It's literally removing the two large bolts that are holding the diff. There is a nut on top, so you got to kind of get a wrench on top and then a bolt on the bottom once it's lowered. Utilize the new hardware with the washers and the locking nuts on the top. So some of them come with a nylock nut. This particular one came with the pinch style lock nut, but either way, it'll hold it just the same. Okay, so you can see as I'm laying under it, but the spacers just go right there between this lower mount and the frame. New hardware goes in, washer, original big large diameter washer, then that hardware spacer between, and then there's the washer with the nut on the top. And I was able to easily just reach in here above around the oil filter housing on this side, and on the front right here, fairly easy access to the nut, not a big deal. Then I can just swing this skid plate back up into place, and those other smaller spacers will go right here between the skid plate and their bolt hole location. So not a big deal. We'll put those spacers in, bolt it back up, keep on trucking. All right, so everything is tightened up that we're going to tighten back up as far as the differential drop. So now we'll get the wheels bolted back on. We'll jack it up, get the tires on, set it on the ground off the jack stands with the weight on it, and then we can go through and tighten the suspension components that remain. I will say, working around vehicles for my whole life pretty much, a super common thing when you're working around these is the dust shield that's behind the brake rotor is really thin. Just look at it, spin the brake rotor when you're done. Make sure that you haven't accidentally pushed on this thing and caused it to touch the rotor. It's very easy to do because of the thin nature of the metal. And it's an annoying scraping sound that you don't want to deal with. So anytime you're working with the wheels and tires, trying to line the wheel back up, it bumps it, anything bumps it. These things are super common to rub on the rotor and make noise. So just be conscientious of them, and you won't have any problems. But let's get the wheels on this thing, drop it down, and see what we got. So we'll take another measurement and see. Obviously, this still has the stock rear and it hasn't moved at all, right? And as the suspension cycles, it could be preloaded somewhat, but just for argument's sake, yeah, that's like 38 and an 8. That's well over 3 inches taller. Hopefully this thing settles some, but it looks killer. Before we even tighten those remaining front suspension bolts, we're going to go ahead and get the rear done, and then we're going to roll a vehicle front to back to let it all settle before tightening those final suspension bolts. So we're going to get a jack under the back, lift it up, get some stands under the frame, take the rear shocks off. Also, you're going to have to remove the rear sway bar links where they mount in order to get the axle to travel down far enough to replace the coils. So not a big deal. Let's get to work. So Toyota has given us an extremely small window to try and get this upper shock nut off. And it seems to have like an almost 7mm top, but that's my 7mm wrench. And the 6mm wrench doesn't fit on there. Yeah, not sure what they were thinking. Very disappointing. So also, this is your sway bar link. same thing. I don't know, is this American hardware or what? It's 12 millimeter, that's how loose it is. An 11 millimeter doesn't fit. So I don't understand. Anyway, yeah, we're gonna keep plugging away. See, but we're gonna need to loosen that stuff up. We're gonna loosen the link arms again because they have bushings in them, uppers, lowers, track bar, all that stuff will get loosened up. And then we'll gently lower the axle with the jack, making sure not to overstretch the brake lines and anti-lock brake lines, and swap these coil springs out. My ratcheting ended 12 millimeter wrench took those off fairly easily. A 17 millimeter wrench took the lower shock bolt off easily. However, this thing up here, wow, this is just wrong. So 9/32 wrench or 7 millimeter wrench are the two sizes that slide on there. Neither of them is any tighter than the other, but a size smaller doesn't fit. And at least with the wrenches I have, neither is deep enough to adequately hold that from spinning, so I can loosen this nut. And this truck is not rusty. This thing has 12,000 miles on it. It is immaculate. I mean, this thing is like brand new. So, yeah, extremely frustrating. Had it been a standard full hex, instead of just having two flat sides, you could have put like another wrench on there, you know, to at least break it free and get it started. But so far, not having any luck. I guess I'm gonna have to opt for the like needle nose vice grips, which I don't like doing, but it's that or cut them off. I mean, they are getting replaced, but you're next to fuel systems and stuff. Definitely don't want to go that option if we don't have to. Well, in my instance, the needle nose vice grips are working. However, if you're dealing with a truck that's been in the rust belt any longer, good luck. I think you may resort to cutting these things off. But luckily for me, that's not the case today. With everything loosened and the coil springs out, you take the bump stop portion and install it into your new coil spring, and then set your new coil spring in place, making sure to lock the bottom into the notched portion here of the spring perch on the axle. Per prior experience, I do tweak this upper brake line bracket out slightly. That gives a little more slack to the brake lines, making sure that you don't hyperextend those. And as well with the anti-lock brake bracket for those wires, I also tweak that. That just gives a little more free play in the length of the brakes, so we don't have any issues with that stuff. So then I usually throw my jack underneath the passenger side of the axle, jack it up slightly. That pushes the driver's side down, making it easier to install. And yeah, and vice versa. Note, coil spring locked into its location there on the axle. Also on the top, not sure if you can see it or not, there is a dedicated pocket for the coil spring there, and you want to make sure that that is sitting correctly in that pocket. If it's not, when you're driving, it could actually pop into place, causing some awkward handling. Also, if it's not, you could have extra pressure on one corner of the suspension. You definitely don't want that. So make sure all that stuff is lined back up. Then we'll start putting things back together. So get these axle jacked back up till we have tension on it. And then we'll get the sway bar links hooked up, new shocks. Again, waiting until we have the tires back on and all the weight of the vehicle on the ground before we tighten any of these link arm bolts for the upper and lower links and the track bar. Okay, so now we're moving on to the rear shocks. So with the Bilstein series 5100 that we're installing, the hardware pack comes with all this stuff. So there is a lower washer that goes on upside down, believe it or not. It looks odd, but that is the way they request it. Whoops, there's two of them. The one with the bigger hole is the one that goes on the bottom. Then you have a rubber bushing with the extra little nipple portion that sticks up. Then you have these two locating washers. So you need to take and figure out which one of these properly fits into the frame pocket hole up there. So you have two options. One of them is real loose. You can't really see it. But one of them is real loose and slides around. The other one fits pretty snug. So that'll keep the shock from rattling around there. So you want to make sure you use the correct locating washer. And then you'll have the remaining rubber bushing, washer, and then the nut on top. The bottom just slides onto the existing factory stud, and then your original bolt goes back into place to hold that. So pretty straightforward. Now that we got it back on all fours, man, what a good looking truck. I absolutely love these 5th gen 4Runners. I really, really would love to have another one. But that sits really nice. The back end's still just a fuzz taller than the front. So if you put something in it, you don't have to worry about it looking like a goofy squatted truck. This thing sits perfect. Now let's get into tightening up the rest of those suspension bolts and we'll be done. All right, so with everything tightened back up, lower control arm bolts, lower strut bolt, upper control arm bolts, rear, upper and lower link bolts, and rear track bar bolts. This thing is ready to go. Now, I'm just debating about these grease zerts. Old Man Emu says to put this on here, but then that grease zert's not there for you to grease. So only somebody who knows, definitely not a lube tech at a shop, is gonna take the initiative to pull the cap and grease that. I don't know, what do you guys think? Do we put them on or not? Anyway, outside of that, let's take some quick post measurements and see where the ride height is. So the post measurements, driver front 37 3/4, driver rear 38 1/8. So about a 1/2 inch difference. On the other side, the driver or passenger front, was 38 1/8, and the rear was like 38 1/2, so about 3/8 of an inch difference. I don't know, looks great to me. So again, some of that could be my floor. I do have a drain in the floor. It has a slight slope to it, but all in all, I think this truck turned out great. Really appreciate you guys watching, and share it with your friends. Subscribe, hit me up, watch some more. Appreciate you.